I think we all should be thinking about the next user fee negotiations. This is going to be a huge opportunity to make it clear what has worked about the user fee programs and what perhaps could be improved, as it always is. But it's also going to be must-pass legislation that will give us an opportunity to perhaps correct some of these missteps with a legislative hammer.
Hello, and welcome to FDA Watch. I'm Wayne Pines. I've been involved with FDA one way or another for several decades. I was an associate commissioner at the agency. I've authored or edited 16 books about FDA.
And I'm Shelly Garg, and I'm the managing partner and founder of Garg Law, a full-service FDA-focused law firm. I have been on the private side advising companies on FDA regulatory compliance and enforcement for the last 15 years.
By now, you know what to expect from FDA Watch. It's an independent, nonpartisan national forum for discussing the latest development, trends, and issues surrounding FDA.
And if you haven't subscribed yet, do so today at fdawatch.net. You'll be the first to receive an email when a new episode drops, including bonus episodes when there's breaking news. Plus, you'll get quick access to our headlines and resource links, as well as some background about our guests.
In this episode, we'll focus on pharma and biologics issues, including the impact of staffing cuts on drug development, investment, drug approvals, inspections, enforcement, and other FDA operations. We have two terrific guests to help discuss these very important issues, and you'll meet them in just a moment.
But first, let's get to some headlines.
Yeah, from the pharma desk, there are almost too many headlines to discuss. I wanted to mention one, and that has to do with tariffs. Tariffs have obviously been front page news for some time. Despite the recent bevy of tariffs the Trump administration is imposing on trade partners, there's been an exception, and that exception has been for pharmaceuticals. The administration has expressed an interest in tariffs for pharmaceuticals to shift pharmaceutical assets and production from other countries such as Ireland, where many drug manufacturers have facilities and have registered intellectual property. We'll, of course, keep an eye on whether this tariff exemption for pharmaceuticals holds up and what it means for the industry and for drug development generally and for drug manufacturing. From the device desk, the industry continues to face the consequences of cutbacks at CDRH. Companies already are seeing delays in product reviews and approvals as the personnel situations get sorted out. Many employees who were originally terminated a few months ago have been asked to come back. Many are coming back. Many are not. The industry has expressed concerns about the delays, not just in reviews, but also in communication with the Center on Product Development and also other questions. This is still in the process of being sorted out. As I said, the entire FDA is being affected by cutbacks, and it's a very, very interesting, evolving situation, and we will continue to monitor that very carefully.
Thanks, Wayne. From the Foods Desk, a food company that develops cell-cultivated meat products recently completed an FDA pre-market consultation for human food made with cultured pork fat cells. With that consultation now complete, the company, Mission Barns, has partnered with the San Francisco restaurant and a national supermarket chain to sell its bacon and meatball products made using the cell-cultivated pork. According to a company press release, these will be the first places to offer cultivated pork products for sale anywhere in the world. This marks a significant milestone for the lab-grown meat industry and its supporters. It could be a positive sign for other companies in the market to progress toward approval and widespread distribution. This is certainly a topic that I am personally very interested in and continue to follow. From the cosmetics desk, a PCPC executive issued a statement on the impact of the Trump administration's reciprocal tariffs on the cosmetics and personal care products industry. Francine Lamoriello, Executive Vice President of Global Strategies at PCPC, expressed concern in her statement about trade policies that could result in higher prices for personal care products. and impact our industry's growth and global competitiveness. The industry accounts for tens of billions of dollars in U.S. manufacturing, with over 4 million jobs, according to Lamoriello's statement. She goes on to say that PCPC maintains its support for balanced trade policy approaches that would create U.S. jobs and strengthen critical global market opportunities for our member companies, and that the organization will continue to diligently work to inform the administration and Congress of the impact of U.S. trade policies on the industry and consumers. Now, Wayne, let's meet our wonderful guest.
Joining us today is Dr. Michelle McMurry-Heath. I've known Michelle for many years. We usually meet in a restaurant in Chevy Chase where we both live. Michelle has had a varied career. Among other things, she was VP of Global External Innovation and Global Leader for Regulatory Sciences at Johnson & Johnson. She then was at FDA as Associate Science Director of CDRH, and most recently, she served as President and CEO of BIO, the Biotechnology Innovation Organization. She remains very active in the pharma and biotech areas. Welcome to FDA Watch, Michelle.
Thank you, Wayne and Shelly. It's great to join you.
Thanks, Michelle. Also joining us today is Alan Minsk. Alan is chair of the Food and Drug Practice and co-chair of the Life Sciences Industry Team at Arnall Golden Gregory. I've known Alan for quite some time and have long admired his career. Alan also serves as general counsel of the Sharing Alliance. Alan focuses his practice on advising pharmaceutical, biological, medical device, cosmetics, and food companies. Welcome to FDA Watch, Alan.
Thank you, Shelly and Wayne, and I can cross this now off of my bucket list. I can tell the kids that when they don't think dreams can come true, I can say otherwise. I'm honored to be asked along with Michelle.
Well, it's great to have you. Let's start with the elephant in the room, FDA staffing cuts. Let me ask first Michelle and then Alan. What do you think their effect may have on drug and biologics approvals, notwithstanding user fees? Michelle?
Well, the notwithstanding user fees is the elephant inside the elephant, right? Wayne, I think we're all struggling to get our arms around what the potential impact of these cuts will be. We all remember how difficult it is to bring people into FDA. I remember when I was there recruiting a chief pediatric medical officer, and it took me 2 years to get him through the process. And by the time he started, I was departing the agency. It takes a really long time to find, validate, recruit, and onboard new talent. And hiring freezes layered on top of deep cuts will have an impact. You know, we've all heard the line that, well, review teams are not being touched. And I think everyone's still trying to sort out how much that is the case. But in the meantime, we're losing reviewers right and left. And that's something we can never afford to do, especially not now.
Alan?
Yeah, I mean, notwithstanding the user fees, which I can cross off my list, I would say obviously the experience of not only recruitment of getting people in, but the people who are leaving with their experience, sort of the practical approach, not just it's got to be this way, but they've seen a lot of products, they've seen it all, and so I think to lose that, that's for those who've left. Obviously, there's morale issues. We have people, candidly, that are reaching out to us that are still at FDA, but are very concerned about the second shoe, or, hey, this is not fun. This is not what I signed up for. And that element, even, offices are lost. We've got a client who's going to be dispute resolution, but there's no ombudsman's office. So we're trying to figure out, like, who do you even, contact? And the last thing I would say would be about inspections, whether they're domestic or foreign, which, of course, we need that to make sure that the products that, are being made in a safe manner and quality standards. So those are just some that come to mind.
Right, and we're going to get to all of that in a few minutes. Have you already seen among your clients delays in drug approvals and postponed meetings?
On the second side, yes. We've seen some postponements, or certainly we need more time to review certain things, those kinds of things. We have not had, again, this is all fairly new. Those clients that had PDUFA dates, FDA met them, good or bad. So that so far has not been an issue, but meetings, yes.
Michelle, you were head of bio, so you're very involved with all parts of the biotech industry as well as the drug industry. I want to ask you a question about investment. How do you think the current environment will affect investments in drug and biotech development?
Yeah, I think we're already seeing the chilling effect. It was interesting. I met with a group of investors in the fall of last year. I think it was October, and everyone was predicting an uptick in mergers and acquisitions and an increase in investment. We thought the worst was over. The exact opposite has happened. It's almost as though the floor has fallen out. So getting resources is more expensive than it used to be, human and financial. Finding investors is more difficult. The insistence on very robust and mature clinical data, which is of course very expensive and time consuming to obtain, has gone up, and everyone is nervous. So it's really had a striking impact in a short amount of time.
I might add, if I can, Wayne, simply the uncertainty. I mean, we see that with Wall Street, but now you see, which is of course investors. The idea is, well, whether that's the tariffs or whether that's will people come back, and the commissioner and the secretary. I mean, all of those things. It makes it difficult for an investor or potential acquirer or divestiture to know what to expect, because it's trying to catch a falling knife, as they say. And so sometimes people just want to wait it out until they have more certainty.
Right. The one thing that the industry needs is predictability and consistency from FDA. Mm-hmm. And I think it's not an understatement to say that is being compromised.
Alan, turning to another subject, could you comment on the effect of these staffing decreases on the dispute resolution process? Certainly in my practice, we either kind of strategize on whether to use or leverage the ombudsman's office sort of earlier in the process or later on. But just what are your kind of perceptions on that, and how has it changed with the recent changes at FDA?
Well, it's changed because it's not really clear that there is an office. There may be an office, there's nobody there. Yeah. I won't identify the client, but we had a situation literally about 2-3 weeks ago where a client received a complete response letter, and they were going to do dispute resolution, and FDA suggests that you go through the ombudsman first. I reached out. We did not ask for a meeting, but I gave one person who I knew at the ombudsman an email to explain, that we would want to talk with that office. Mm-hmm. And she wrote back, unfortunately, this was the day after the notice, the major.
Yeah.
I'm no longer going to be involved, and I'm not sure who else will be in the office. So I reached out to another person, and that person said, well, I'm retiring next week. And I think that was probably an expedited retirement. And so I said, she said, my whole office is gone. So she says, we're not exactly, now, so far we haven't asked, but I will probably have to reach out to people in the chief counsel's office that I know to just simply say, when we get there, we can certainly skip the ombudsman's office, but simply is that the process, or is there going to be something else? And I'm not sure that they'll necessarily know.
Mm. So how do you navigate those challenges, that uncertainty? Yeah. Like what?
So the client said to me, you'll make a lot of money on this, jokingly. And I said, you'll have to figure it out. And I go, I'm not sure where to start. And I said, because I've known the client for a while, and lawyers don't want to tell the client they don't necessarily know where to start. But I knew the CEO very well. And I said, we may be learning this together, basically.
Right. Yeah. Sure.
I told him I would charge him half and not the whole rate. But it's problematic. I mean, again, the ombudsman, it's not just for appeals. It's for, the ombudsman is supposed to be a facilitator when the trains, stop running. And what do you do? And if they're not there, you lose that piece of guidance. Right. And you become adversarial now with the review division, or do you say, hey, I'm going to consider a lawsuit? And so, again, it gets back to the uncertainty. And I'm not sure that FDA necessarily knows.
Yeah. Michelle, same question for you, if you have any thoughts or perspectives on that.
No, I think this idea that we can centralize a lot of the services that FDA carries out or needs for its day-to-day function, like dispute resolution, is somewhat naive, because we've seen attempts in the past to try to centralize functions, and FDA is so unique inside of Health and Human Services,
Mhm.
that the people with the expertise are really, really regulator specific. And so that I think is going to be a huge
Mhm.
loss.
Yeah.
They're also there to be objective to some extent, to sort of give
Right.
you an independent perception. Well, if I'm going back to the people I had a problem with, they're going to say, well, we told you what to do. But the
Right.
ombudsman had at least a role in trying to
Yeah.
find out what's going on behind the scenes and offer some guidance. And I think right now that's going to be gone.
And Alan, another thing that's really odd is that FDA has different conflict of interest restrictions on their
Yeah,
staff
right.
than HHS does. And
Mhm.
so this concern of having people involved in the decision-making process that haven't been fully vetted for conflict of interest should have everyone's attention.
Right.
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask Michelle and go back to what you just said about the centralization of services, because HHS has already announced that communications, procurement, HR, even IT is going to be consolidated within HHS. And you just said it, I think, very well. And I've reiterated that on many occasions, and that is FDA is really unique. Talk for a minute about any experiences that you had when you were at the agency with regard to a consolidation of services, when you had people working on items such as IT or HR, when they really were not expert in that area. It's very difficult because of FDA's unique requirements.
Yeah. Well, HR is a prime example. That anecdote I told earlier about taking 2 years to hire a chief pediatric medical officer, that was the last time we tried to centralize HR functions within the agency. And it's very, very difficult because the central HHS HR teams are not necessarily looking out for the things you need in a regulator. And it's very, very challenging. And it's interesting. I was thinking of how the stories come full circle. That amazing candidate that we recruited just retired early as part of the most recent thing. So talk about loss of expertise. The other place that it's really going to be felt is in the IT space. We have a big enough issue inside of FDA getting the generalized FDA IT expertise to drill down into all the product specific areas. So, for example, the IT issues in the Center for Devices and the way their applications work are quite unique from the IT issues you have in the Center for Drugs. And so, pulling that up even from the 20,000 to the 100,000 foot level is going to make it all the more challenging to try to streamline some of the processes and make them much more user friendly than they have been in the past.
Yeah, for me, to quote Yogi Berra, it's deja vu all over again, because when I was at FDA, a lot of the consolidation that they're talking about now was tried, and then it didn't work for the reasons we've talked about, and now they're going to try it again. I was head of communications, and every new secretary coming in had his or her idea as to how they wanted to control FDA communications, and it eventually wound up that they found out that most of FDA communications are relatively routine. They're not ultra high policy. They're not controversial. It involves recalls. It involves drug approvals, biologics approvals, and the like. And they always redelegated the responsibility back to the agency. Alan, one last question. I want to shift gears for a second here. One last question before we go to our break. Um, uh, ad promo. Ad promo is something that is unique to FDA. There's no other agency in the country that regulates ad promo the way that FDA does. Federal Trade Commission has jurisdiction, but doesn't do the same kind of job that FDA does. What do you think the effect of the layoffs and the change of leadership at the FDA is going to have on ad promo policy and enforcement?
Yeah, that's a great question. Um, I don't know offhand how many people were let go. I know some people were let go, so I don't know who's standing. I will say that there have been two letters, enforcement letters, or NOVs, not notice of violations. So I think that FDA is still doing its job, as of course they should. I think that the issuance of guidance is going to be difficult because we just have fewer people. They're in charge of enforcement, and now you're asking them to sort of spend time coming up with a proactive guidance. So I think that's going to be difficult. We're already, before the cuts, we were asking FDA to do more with less, and now there's a lot less and a lot more that's going to be imposed. And so I think I would be careful and cautious about saying, to any company, there's no more sheriff, because I think there are sheriffs and there are police officers. It's not as though OPDP was so active even the last couple of years, but I would caution companies to not be too excited that the world is their oyster because there just aren't that many police officers. I think FDA will still try to find good cases, if you will, or a good fact pattern where they can still make their point that, you and Shelly can have a webinar on that, or another speaker can talk about something an FDA knocked a company because of this, that, or the other. So I don't think that's going to go away. I think the proactive guidance, I just can't see how they're going to be able to keep up that pace.
Right. They've basically terminated the policy people at OPDP, and those are the people who are writing the policies. So
right.
There won't be
even
any
if they delegated somebody else, I don't think they couldn't fill that role.
Yeah. And as you know, the guidances in the ad promo area are especially complicated and difficult. Yeah. You really have to be an expert.
But very helpful, also very helpful. And I think that's a reason why a lot of companies take the guidance, because they are typically pretty clear. And I think that helps with the reduction of enforcement actions, because I think companies are saying, okay, we now know what FDA wants.
Right. And I would just add one footnote, and that is the two untitled letters that went out this year already from OPDP. That was pre-April 1st. That was pre-reorganization.
Yep.
And it was with the old OPDP, if I may say so. We'll have to see what the policies of the new OPDP are.
To that point that you both raise, Alan and Wayne, we always are wanting more detail in FDA guidances. Often companies and manufacturers are trying to read between the lines with new FDA guidance so that they can comply in every way possible. And if anything, they're looking for more detail. And my concern is, as we pull this up to the secretary level, we'll only decrease the level of detail and the clear instructions that companies need to comply.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Michelle. We're going to take a quick break right now, but don't go anywhere because we'll be right back.
And we're back. We're talking about the pharmaceutical landscape surrounding FDA, particularly the effects of the agency's recent flurry of staffing cuts.
There's been obviously these cuts tied and sort of FDA's statements that due to the cuts, there's decreased staff, which is likely going to result in decreased inspections, abroad and domestically. Can you talk about what you're seeing in terms of the effect of this staffing decrease when it comes to inspections and import alerts? Is FDA really kind of carrying out on its promise, or is enforcement still high?
I think it's still a little early to figure out what the agency's policies will be. I will say that we have had a couple of clients in the last 10 to 14 days who have had some customs FDA issues. I don't know that that's because of, of certain things. I will say that one of them did involve a product coming in from China. I will say that there was a lot of channels in the distribution, and I think, frankly, when they came to me, I said it's hard to follow the bouncing ball, and I suspect that's what happened with customs and FDA, who was doing what. So I think from the imports standpoint, I think it will probably be very similar to what we saw in the past, because certain types of products, obviously with safety and or manufactured in certain countries that, without identifying, that are typically on the radar more than not. I think from an inspection standpoint, I don't really know what they're going to do, frankly. I mean, even when you do foreign inspections were typically, one or two people went out. They tried to do it in a couple of weeks. It was high-level inspections because they wanted to get home to see their family. So they tried to see as many companies as they could in a 2-3 week period of time. It was always very, very high level. It was not the type of inspection you would have seen domestically. So now you got fewer people to still see the same number of products.
And you have Reduced budget, right?
Right. And then within the United States, you still have those issues and the reduced budgets and the reduced personnel. And then, God forbid, unfortunately, these things are often a God forbid. Something happens, and then Congress brings up FDA and say, where were you? A little bit reminds me of the pharmacy compounding in New England pharmacy, And so we're all afraid that that's sort of how these things get addressed, is because, God forbid, something happens that we don't want, but probably could have been preventable.
Mm. Well, and I think that's such a good point. We tend to forget that FDA is a stopgap in a lot of different health emergencies. I mean, just think of the last decade between COVID, infant formula, off-label compounding. There have been all of these issues where the public has really needed a very fast and very clear response. And anything that muddles that or slows it down is going to be a challenge.
Thanks, Michelle.
Shelley, there's also something else that I was thinking about as well. We tend to think of FDA as the regulator that you have to go through. And so, whatever difficulties you may face in navigating the process or slowing down the timelines, that's just the ticket to entry, and everyone's going to comply. But that's a very short memory view of the situation. And if we go back to the inception of the user fee program, we had it because we were falling behind the UK and Europe in terms of the number of new drug approvals. Companies were finding it was much more beneficial to go through Europe first than to come to the US. And some people may say, well, what's the downside of that? The downside is that we also don't get access to early clinical trials, which are often the only source of cutting edge therapies or therapies of last resort to many struggling patients. We also don't get the clear education and the ability to feed back in the drug development process that you do when drugs are actually developed in your market. And so the two advantages we've had have been an amazingly efficient and effective FDA and a really robust investment ecosystem. And we're kind of both are at risk at the same time.
If I can, Shelly or Wayne,
please
knock me off if it's too much. But I was in synagogue for Sabbath and the Jewish holiday, and somebody said to me, we disagree on everything, certain our politics. And he said, I think that they should just shut down FDA and privatize it. That's what this person's opinion was. And he knew I happened to do food and drug law. And I didn't really want to get into him. I said, we're going to agree to disagree. But I said, people hear of things that go wrong, but you don't hear. I says, so many products you and your family take, and you don't question it. You just take it every day. Okay. But I says, and once in a blue moon, something bad happens. I said, it's always the negative. But I says, we don't really thank the people who do it right, because every day, whether it's food, pet food, devices, drugs, whatever, and no one really says thank you, thank you, FDA, for all of this. But I says, if FDA is viewed or perceived as inefficient, and there are probably certain inefficiencies within the government agency, but some well, they should just be completely fixed. I'm like, was it really broken? I mean, certainly there's ways to improve any government agency, and certainly the FDA has maybe made some missteps along the way. But you have it pretty good. You don't even know you don't know how good you've got it, because they've done such a good job. So anyway, that was just and I think that will go away because the knock-on credibility that I think has occurred unfairly, and with all of the reductions, et cetera.
No, we take for granted what FDA does, and we presume our foods are safe, and we presume our drugs and devices are safe in the context of a medical product and have been shown to be effective, and we just take all that for granted. And it is up to the FDA to make sure that happens. I want to ask a very practical question. This is the $64,000 question for you, Alan. I don't know what you're charging an hour these days, but in terms of what companies should do, and I'm going to ask the same question to Michelle, what should companies do to address the latest organizational and personnel changes at FDA?
What I would say is, not to hype your webinar too much, but I think that these types of podcasts are very helpful. Any kind of educational program where there's an opportunity for people to speak about the issue, have a discussion. Certainly, conferences, I won't mention any particular group, but where there can be companies can sort of network among themselves. What are you doing? I think that if they're not a member of a trade association, they probably should be a member of a trade association who will often be kind of carrying the water as it relates to any kind of legislative or even executive issues, whether it's lobbying or talking to the government. I think that's helpful. I think that we all have people coming to us and say, what's going to happen? And I think, we have purposely, frankly, not done a bulletin to say, here's what's going to happen, because to me, that's like a magic 8-ball. I'm not faulting those firms and consulting firms that do that. But to me, shake a magic 8-ball, which would show my age, and sort of say what's going to happen. And I'll probably say, ask me later. Okay. So I think we know the potential damage. I think the possible solution is sort of trying to figure out, well, now what do we do? Who do we talk to? And obviously all politics are local. So as it relates to your particular product, you reach out to your project manager and you try to ask off the record, are we still on track vis-a-vis PDUFA or GDUFA? I think you do try to have maybe your C-suite, or if you have a lobbying arm, either in the company or trade association, try to, see who your friends are in Congress. I think the more the merrier, because I think there's strength in numbers in that respect. Obviously, there's a role for outside counsel and consultants where we sometimes can, talk to people. But I'm not even sure that people at FDA really even know what they can say on certain things. Obviously, on your particular application, they can. But, I'm not sure either they don't know or I'm not sure that they're allowed to say. I reached out to a friend of mine when all this was happening, and I said, are you still okay? Yes. And I asked a question, I've known this guy for 25 years. And he wrote back a very, very almost template response. The division is actively reviewing and does not expect any disruptions. And I wrote back and I go, thanks, anything more? And he goes, the agency is actively working on whatever. He's repeated it. Okay. And I've known the guy for 25 years. Okay. So that's a long-winded answer of sort of saying, be proactive, try to listen to these types of podcasts. Talk to your congresspeople if you can, and certainly on your specific application, reach out to the project manager and that team to just sort of figure out, okay, all of this stuff notwithstanding, what about my application? Because that's frankly what most companies care about, near term at least.
So I have a micro answer and a macro answer. So the micro answer is for the companies I advise and that I'm on the board of, my immediate recommendation is get in touch with your review teams. If you have really business critical submissions that are pending, you want to reach out to your reviewers, make sure they're still there. And if they're not, who is likely to be carrying their water? And show your appreciation for what they've done. I mean, just verbally make them aware that they are a valued part of our healthcare system and we need them to keep going. So that's the first. On the macro level, I think we all should be thinking about the next user fee negotiations. This is going to be a huge opportunity to make it clear what has worked about the user fee programs and what perhaps could be improved, as it always is. But it's also going to be must pass legislation that will give us an opportunity to perhaps correct some of these missteps with a legislative hammer. So I think those two areas of focus are important right now.
Yeah, those are excellent points. And I think, like you said, Alan and Michelle, I think the collective understanding, the proactive outreach, I think the reason why Wayne and I have started this podcast is to be able to speak with a variety of folks across the industry, because I know we're all feeling these types of issues, and to hear perspectives. So we really appreciate your thoughts on this. Last question for both of you to wrap up the episode. There is, of course, a need to include all segments of the patient population in clinical trials to assure we gain a full understanding of a new product's profile. Could you both speak about that need and how FDA will aim to include all demographics of patients in trials? Alan, we'll start with you, and then we'll turn to Michelle to close out our discussion.
Well, I would think that those of us on the call certainly believe in what you just said. I'm not sure in light of DEI issues, let me just say it that way, or attempts to strike from websites certain things or exclude and I'm trying not to be political, but just simply with the administration's public statements about DEI, um, I fear that the goal will not be able to be attained because if one hand is saying, let's do away with certain DEI programs, and yet we're all agreeing that there's a value, particularly, well, I would personally say in many things, and certainly including in clinical trial development, recruitment, and they seem to be at odds, I guess. They should not be at odds, but I think that they seem to be at odds, and so I don't know what the answer will be there. Michelle, that's a $64,000 question to you, I guess.
I think this is such a critical issue, and not even going from politics or presumption, but just looking back over the last 100 days, the clinical trial diversity guidances that FDA had put up on their website were part of what got pulled down, and then perhaps some were resurrected with preambles, really dismissing their criticality and their importance. So we know that this sort of approach to clinical research is something that's come under scrutiny. Now let's break this down a little bit. If assaults on DEI are focused on unfair advantage, that's misguided when a misguided perspective when you're looking at clinical trials, because when you're talking about diverse clinical trials, you're actually talking about sharing the risk of being in a clinical trial with all populations. There is an advantage, of course, if it's a last resort therapy that you have access to, cutting edge new therapies. Of course, that's an advantage, but it's also a risk. And so we all should be playing a part in that process. The other thing is we need to be able to tailor medication regimes to individual patients. We used to call it personalized medicine, then we called it an inclusive clinical research. It's really about tailoring medication to the specific needs of the person. And particularly if we also remove an emphasis on including women in clinical trials and not just different races and ethnicities, doctors are really going to be trying to prescribe medication with one hand tied behind their back. And so it's something that's really, really key. And then the last thing I would say is the other advice I give to companies is to future-proof your regulatory work. So we all know that it can take a decade to develop a new drug. That decade can face many different political administrations. And so you want to cover your bases so that no matter what changes in the future, you're ready with a regulatory submission that is going to be strong and persuasive. And that means having inclusive clinical trials so that you have the data on hand to show that all patients will benefit from your breakthrough.
Michelle, let me ask you one follow-up question, and that is, do you think that the FDA reviewers who have been trained and I believe are committed to making sure that there are multiple patient populations in any clinical trial, do you think that they will continue to insist upon that kind of design?
It's really unclear to me, Wayne, at this particular point. I think they all understand that it's a scientific imperative that trials are inclusive of the patients that the drug is eventually designed to treat. So that part is very, very key. I think there's a lot of fear in the agency right now, from what I'm hearing. Fear in terms of what they can say, fear in terms of how they reach their decisions. And personally, I don't know about you, but I don't think there's anything worse than a scared regulator. I want a brave regulator, right? A regulator that can really stand up for patient rights. So I think that we're going to have to wait and see, but it will be interesting to see. I mean, this is outside of FDA, but CMS's main justification for not covering the new Alzheimer's therapies was that the trials were not diverse enough to reflect the Medicare population. Is CMS going to now reverse that decision? And if so, how do they presume to pay for Alzheimer's care for the vast majority of American seniors who may be facing this in the future? So there's a lot to unpack here, and I think everyone should just stay tuned.
That sounds like a teaser for another.
I like that. Nice cliffhanger, Michelle.
I love that quote, scared regulator. I've never heard that, those two words put together like that, but I think it's a great concept. And
Yep.
I think it's right on. And that is we want confident regulators and knowledgeable, but we don't want people who are afraid of anything. Let me thank both of you. This has been a tremendous session, very, very educational, and for your knowledge and for your insights. And this is a difficult time for FDA. It's a difficult time for the industry. It's a difficult time for the public. And so, as I think Alan said, listening to podcasts like this hopefully will shed some light and some insight on what's going on. We're going to turn briefly to our resource link segment, where we provide you with some valuable links that you might want to check out. So, Shelly, let's share them with our audience right now.
Will do, Wayne, but I want to first point out that these links will be included on our website, fdawatch.net, so there is no need to write anything down.
Let's turn to our Pharma resource link first. Former acting commissioner and principal deputy commissioner of FDA and a friend of this show, she was on just a few weeks ago, Janet Woodcock, spoke out about FDA staffing cuts at an April session of the Biopharma Congress. Janet was joined by former CDRH director Jeff Shurin and by attorney Frank Sazanowski for a panel discussion entitled The Future of FDA, Where Do We Go From Here? And she said, leadership of the agency has been decapitated, and I think that was somewhat deliberate. I would urge you to look at that resource. Again, as Shelly said, it's going to be posted on our link. Let's turn to our devices resource link. According to an article in Medical Express, FDA approvals of medical devices slowed to a 10-year low in January and March of this year. According to the article, federal data show the agency has approved only 9 new or substantially changed high-risk medical devices in the 3-month period, down from 13 and 14 in 2024 and 2023, respectively. This decrease is reported despite FDA having more applications for high-risk device pending by the end of last year than the same date in 2023. You might think that that has something to do, and I think it's right, the significant decrease in staffing, plus, just to quote Michelle, scared regulators, especially at CDRH. And again, this is an article that is well worth looking at.
Thanks, Wayne. Let's look at our foods link. From the Foods Desk, a recent op-ed in Stat News raised concerns regarding the regulation of pet food amid FDA staffing cuts. The article's writer, Catherine O'Malley, a senior policy analyst at Boston University School of Public Health, said the regulation of pet food in the U.S. is, quote, spotty, noting that although FDA regulates the ingredients found in commercial pet food, it does not approve individual products or brands. O'Malley went on to note that the cuts at FDA, including those at the Center for Veterinary Medicine, or CVM, are effectively shrinking necessary oversight of the approximately $60 billion per year pet food industry. We encourage you to check out this well-researched and informative piece. And finally, let's turn to our cosmetics link. In the mid-March episode of NPR's Life Kit podcast, cosmetics regulation experts, including former FDA cosmetics director Linda Katz and Rutgers University researchers Emily Barrett and Adina Lanos, convened to discuss the hidden risks in personal care products. The episode opens with the story of Lash Lure, a 1930s mascara that caused blindness and even death, which led to stronger FDA oversight at the time. But guests noted that cosmetics today still are not necessarily pre-approved for safety. In fact, they are not pre-approved for safety, and many still contain hormone-disrupting and carcinogenic ingredients, such as parabens and formaldehyde, which we've mentioned previously on FDA Watch. While regulations do, of course, exist, the Life Kit discussion notes that consumers are still left to navigate safety concerns on their own. The episode breaks it all down, offering practical tips on identifying safer alternatives. We encourage you to give it a listen. And I'd like to add that, of course, with the new implementation of MOCRA, safety substantiation is required, must be on file. And we've talked about that, and we'll continue to address that in episodes moving forward. Again, this link and all of our links are available at fdawatch.net. And on that note, Wayne, it's time to thank Michelle and Alan for being such excellent guests on this episode and really having a very fun and engaging discussion. We'd also like to thank our podcast creator and executive producer, Michael Levin Epstein, and our assistant producer, Sam Hoffmeister.
And Shelly, this is important. If any of our listeners want to suggest or be a guest on our show, or want to be a marketing partner or sponsor, or just comment on the show, you can contact us at info, that's INFO, at fdawatch.net. I'll repeat that, info@fdawatch.net. We'd really like to hear from you, and definitely check out our website, which is the same address, fdawatch.net. Finally, I'd like to ask you that if you're so inclined to give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, please do so. It really does make a difference. And remember to follow us. And if you're not subscribing already, you can subscribe. It's free. You will get a notice every time there is a new podcast. You won't miss a single episode. And be sure to have your friends and neighbors and everybody that you ever met subscribe to fdawatch.net.
Thanks, Wayne. And as we say at the end of every episode of FDA Watch, if you really want to watch what FDA is doing, listen to FDA Watch.